1 second. It lets you know the recording is in progress. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I am so excited to welcome you all here for the Inclusion Talk series as we honor and commemorate Hispanic Heritage Month. And it is my great pleasure to introduce our virtual keynote today, Tel P. Williams IV. Tel is a gay Puerto Rican born and raised in Indiana. He is a former pre-K teacher turned therapist and stand-up comedian living in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. After 10 plus years of teaching, Tel decided to leave the profession and obtain a graduate degree in clinical social work and has become a therapist and uses his talents to help those in his community. Tel focuses his work in mental health on LGBTQIA and BIPOC populations. Tel continues to advocate for equity and social justice through his social media presence. Anybody here that's on TikTok has probably seen Tel, as well as working along with political groups. And with that said, I am going to spotlight our speaker and Tel, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Ironically, I am not great at technology, so I apologize if I have a mess up here or there, especially with PowerPoints. Again, you think with teaching and social media, I would know by now. I don't, but we'll do this together. So I'm going to share my PowerPoint here with you all. Let's make it big, though. Let's see if I can do that, if I know how to do that. Can I just double click and it's big? No, I can't do that.
I think when you go to share, Tel, where you were, it just share full screen. I think that will
share.
Yes, I think
full
so.
Screen.
Or slideshow right next to animations and review, right at the very top. There you go, slideshow.
That looks like it's probably
and then
right.
Play from start. There you go.
Oh my gosh, look at that. Okay, can you guys see the screen now? I'm hoping the full thing.
Yes.
Great. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about how it's Hispanic, Heritage Month, and we're going to be talking about how our identity can also be a superpower, which is kind of a strange thing to think about in the sense of we've been taught and told by people who oppress us that it is an obstacle. And so it's changing and reframing and relighting that and realizing that who we are and the different intersectionalities of what makes us us is a gift, and it's a superpower, right? So a little bit more about me. I think most of it was covered. So I am a former pre-K teacher of 10 plus years. Now currently I am a therapist. My family's from Ay Bonito, Puerto Rico. That's kind of like in the mountains there. It's not a coastal place. But I grew up in northern Indiana. I always say I can't be, scared of much because Mike Pence was our governor, and I grew up gay Puerto Rican, northern Indiana. So, I'm tough, I guess. I now live in the Philadelphia suburbs. I moved here about 5 years ago, and I've been married for 6 years. All of this will come in importance a little later. So it is Hispanic Heritage Month. Something kind of ironic, I guess, is I didn't know Hispanic Heritage Month was a thing until I was about in my mid-20s, I would say. It was definitely not something that was celebrated in Indiana. And it wasn't until I was teaching and I was looking at my classroom and the makeup of my classroom and different cultures that I wanted to celebrate. And I was like, how do I bring in my identity and my culture and what it means to be Puerto Rican, and realize there's an entire month. So that is how it just gives you a little example of what life was like in northern Indiana. So let me give you some quick facts about Hispanic Heritage Month if you don't know them, right? So when did we start observing Hispanic Heritage Month? It was in 1968. It started as Hispanic Heritage Week, and President Johnson was the first president to observe it, right? In 1987, the Representative Esteban Torres of California proposed that we expand it from a week to a month, and it go from September 15th to October 15th. And then from when it was introduced in 87, and 1989 was the first time we celebrated a month long. And that I think was signed in by President Bush, the first Bush. So there's a significance. I always kind of wondered, why is it not like the month of September or the month of October? Why is it half and half? And it's interesting. So it's September 15th is the anniversary of independence for a lot of Latin American countries. We have Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua. And then Mexico celebrates it the 16th. Chile celebrates it the 18th. So that's where it starts. That's why it started there. And then it expands all the way into October to kind of combat this idea of Columbus Day. So it also falls in Hispanic Heritage Month. And it's a holiday, Columbus Day, that's becoming increasingly less popular for good reason, especially in Hispanic, Latino, and indigenous communities, due to now the understanding and true history of Christopher Columbus inflicting violence and genocide on, indigenous Hispanic and Latino people. And now there's kind of an interesting rewrite of the holiday and celebrated in Hispanic and Latino cultures, where it's kind of a calendar day, and it's a day that's kind of like a rally cry for activists and a celebration of our culture, rather than celebrating the oppressor and the person who colonized a group of people. So that's kind of a quick facts about it, right? There is interesting things even as we talk about Hispanic Heritage Month, right? And a lot of it comes from even just the naming of the month. The terms Hispanic and Latino are usually interchangeably used, but they don't mean the same thing. They're two different words. So Hispanic describes people who speak Spanish or from Spanish-speaking countries, and they use the term Hispanic in the US, right? So Hispanic isn't really used in other countries outside of the US. Latino, and there's a, Latina, Latinx, Latine, different terms, right? Just in that alone, are people living in the United States with cultural ties to Latin American countries. I say this because when we celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month, we talk about all these different countries and Spaniards, people in Spanish that are Spaniard or Spanish, they are not Latino because they're not from a Latin American country, right? Same how someone from Brazil can be Hispanic, but if they don't speak Spanish or they don't have the culture of, they would be Latino, Latina, Latinx, Latine. I always say this because this is stuff, again, growing up in a place in northern Indiana that was so oppressive. These are things I was never told or taught. And these are things that my family didn't know, moving from, Ay Bonito to the US. So it's interesting now as an adult, starting in my early 20s, now I'm 32, and trying to learn all of this and grasp it. Something that I found super interesting though, because I don't know if, there's other, Latino, Hispanic, Latinx people here, but it was interesting when I was looking at this that more than 3/4 of Hispanic and Latino people in the US would rather identify themselves as the origin and country their family's from. And that's always been me. I never knew what box to check when I was filling out government forms, going to college, applying for a job, because it's such a vastly different group of people that's all kind of summed up into one word. And outside of the US, no one sits there and says, I'm Latino, I'm Hispanic. They say, I'm Mexican, I'm Puerto Rican, I'm Guatemalan. And so it's kind of the name in itself, it's engulfing a group of people that can be vastly different, have different cultures and different ties. And it's an interesting concept to even look at just the name alone, right? So another example, again, how Hispanic Heritage Month is celebrated in the US. There's many major cities hold festivals. I know Philadelphia does. There's national and local museums that feature artwork by Hispanic and Latino people. And then schools celebrate by reading books by and about Hispanic and Latino people. I did that in my classroom. I did that with my students. I'm very fortunate that my husband is a children's literature professor at a college. So there are times that I'm like, is there any new books I should be reading? Are there any better books, or is there a replacement book for this one? And so it's interesting to see in a month how different people, different organizations celebrate that. This whole talk, though, isn't necessarily about Hispanic Heritage Month. That's kind of the backdrop. That's why I'm here. But I want to talk about um, my experience growing up. I use the word Boricua, which is a Puerto Rican. But I think when I'm at a presentation or I'm learning about something or asked to do, some professional development for work, I learn better through someone's storytelling and someone's actual what they went through, what their experience has been. I feel like that's way more fun than just getting facts thrown at you all the time. So I thought it would be a good idea to share kind of my history, my family's history, and what that makeup looked like. Because I know that this isn't just my story, right? It's many people, Latino and Hispanic people's stories out there. So this right here, I don't know if you can see the mouse, is the creepiest drawing someone made of my grandparents and their children. I had to include it though because it's eerie. I don't like it. But so the Camacho family is from Ay Bonito, Puerto Rico. Jorge and Carmen, my grandma and grandpa, at the very top of that black and white picture. They had 12 kids. And they moved from Ay Bonito to the Bronx in the mid 1970s. And I can't tell you why. I have asked several times. And I think my family thinks we're joking. For some strange reason, they went from the Bronx, New York to Goshen, Indiana in the 1980s. Don't know why, but they did. So when they had moved from the Bronx, right, which had a lot of Puerto Rican people there, to Indiana, it was vastly different. And my grandparents, even from Ay Bonito to New York, kind of put this heavy thing on, like, fit in, assimilate to the people around you, talk like them, look like them, do activities like them. And it was this idea of like they really just they were conflating the American dream with kind of forgetting your identity and who you are. And so they were expected very quickly to do that, which is wildly disappointing. And it was heartbreaking to hear about as a kid growing up, to hear about the things that they kind of had to like let go of. There's very few pictures. The picture first one here is a picture of them in Ay Bonito. The one next to is my grandma and grandpa at my aunt's house. I had to include that because there's nothing more Puerto Rican than seeing a bunch of cars. We were all there for a get together. As you can imagine, they had 12 kids. You can think about how many cousins I have. There's like well over 50 of us. So we just kind of take up someone's yard and all park there and hang out. Kind of makes me go looking at that. So when the Camacho family moved to Goshen, Indiana, they were the first. They were the first Hispanic and Latino family to live in Goshen. And I believe they were one of the first non-white people to move there. It was tiny. I think when they moved in the 80s, there was like 18,000 people that lived there. And then Jorge and Carmen encouraged their kids to become, like I said, acclimated with US culture. So then what kind of happened is the next generation had less an importance of our Puerto Rican culture. And that was difficult, right? A lot of them, like I said, there's 12. So you can see that the older cousins know Spanish, and then as we go down, they less frequent, less familiar with speaking Spanish. And it's difficult. There was less importance of the foods that we cooked that they did in Puerto Rico, and so much of that was kind of lost as you trickle down to the oldest down to the youngest and their kids. And there was this idea too, and it would be silly not to talk about this idea of colorism, right? And my mom and her siblings were more dark complected, and when they moved here, my grandma had a huge importance, and not in retrospect, I think it was out of fear of especially moving from New York to Goshen, Indiana, which was very white. of not looking like everyone else. And so there was this idea of having to look, a very specific way. And it's kind of ironic because in Puerto Rican culture, there's kind of an ongoing joke. There's not a look of a Puerto Rican white, right? There's Puerto Ricans with green eyes and blonde hair, and then we have Afro Puerto Ricans, and then we have Puerto Ricans with freckles and red hair. There's not a specific look. So it's kind of wild to see that and to hear stories of that of my family and as they grew up. So because they were the first, but because they were also my grandfather, was privileged enough to have gone to college, so he had a very good paying job. So he did his best to kind of fight these racist ideas of kind of what people had. And as Goshen grew, and I'll explain why Goshen is so unique to the entire U.S. As Goshen grew, and more Hispanic and Latino people came in, my mom's parents, or the entire Camacho family, really had this exception to the rule that, like, well, but they're not that kind of Puerto Rican, or they're not, and so the Camacho family became kind of the exception to this, right? And that's not a good thing. I think that held a lot of kind of inner prejudiced ideas and a lot of self-hate. So then there was this constant change, though. So as my grandparents got older, and I think specifically looking at their entire life as a whole, they kind of found this renewed importance of their culture and their identity and who they are, and being Puerto Rican. And I could see in my family this, teach the kids Spanish. And I know we told you not to do that before, but they started bringing over more of their family from the island to come visit. My grandparents and my family started taking more trips to Puerto Rico. And so there's this renewed idea of identity and self. And I have to contribute that to, one, the makeup of our city was completely shifting, but also my grandparents getting older and realizing that, once you're gone, all you have is the legacy that you leave. And I think they looked around their legacy and thought, there's some things that we might need to fix, right? So there's a gap then within our family. Like I said, my older cousins were more involved and knew the culture better than the younger. And so there was this flip, and I'm one of the younger of the kiddos. My mom was, I think, 10th in out of 12. So it was learning a lot. It was my grandparents completely stopped speaking English to us, and we had to learn Spanish that way if we wanted to talk to them. So I wanted to give you an example of what the population looked like. In 2000, there was 19% of the population was Hispanic, and then by 2020, it grew to 33%. With that said, there is also a amazing and wonderful community of people that are non-documented, that aren't accounted for in this. And so it was incredible to see such a explosion of culture and diversity in this small Midwestern conservative town, right? But as this was happening, there was a lot of conflicts that were rising too in Goshen. And like I said, I was going to explain why Goshen was so unique, not just in our area, but globally. So Indiana is the RV capital of the world. Recreational vehicles, people go camping in it. I don't know, it's too bougie for me. But they make a bunch of RVs. And because of that, they need a lot of factory workers. And so people would come, and then they would call their families to come, and it paid well. And so people were taking these jobs that paid well, and able to kind of lift their family or start to kind of wiggle out of poverty. 9/11 happened, and again, as I talked about the makeup of Indiana, a lot of people did not know any difference in people's backgrounds, ethnicity, cultures, races. And so my family, who were darker complected, or my family who were Afro Puerto Rican, horrific racist and racism was happening around that, right? Especially after 9/11. And so we saw kind of a huge turn in our city, right? And then we had the financial crisis of 2008. And what happened then was that stock markets crashed, and these companies that hired all of these Hispanic and Latino people, and these companies that might have hired Hispanic and Latino people that were undocumented, knew that they were in a financial strain and then reported them to ICE. And it was a horrific time in Indiana. I know Obama had visited twice to talk about the makeup economically of what was going on, but we were seeing, as I was in high school, my classmates having to move in with people they weren't so familiar with because their parents were gone overnight. It was horrific. And I think that it kind of shook us as a community to see so many people hurting. And then with the presidency of Trump, and again, living in a conservative area in Indiana, we saw another wave of that. And it was, I remember such an overwhelming feeling of just of a constant oppression of people and seeing so much hate towards it. And so what would happen is you would assimilate, right? You would kind of deflect and deny all of the things that make you you, and you didn't want to claim too much of your Latino or Hispanic heritage because you were other than. And it was a really fine and strange time. By the time I was leaving school, our student body was 56% Hispanic or Latino. And I think it was something like 30% white. So there was also this anger from people of suddenly they were the minority, although they're not, in that area. That's how they felt. It was a very strange makeup from what I had as a kid. And so in talking about this and in talking about so much of the negative, there was so much good. There was so much good within our community. And I could see these people, these change makers, being more vocal, and these change makers, taking families and uplifting them and giving them a voice, kind of passing the microphone. And one of them was my mother, Betty Camacho, the family advocate. So I think it's important to know who she was as a person and what made her such a incredible human, honestly, but also why her voice was so needed. So my mom got pregnant at 16, and then my grandpa had her marry the guy that would become her husband, and they moved to Germany. He was in the army. This was devastating to my grandparents because this kind of ruined their image of what was okay and was not okay. And my mom kind of embarrassed that and shook that up. So they were like, kind of just got to get rid of this situation. So after a few years in Germany, my mom moved back. She divorced her first husband. She met my father. She had 3 more kids. She divorced him. And I think she saw 3rd time's the track, and then she got remarried for the 3rd time. But she found herself divorced and single. And we were living in poverty. And my mom became familiar with what's known as the Head Start program. And if you don't know what the Head Start program is, it's a federally funded program for families they consider at risk or living in poverty, or children if they have a disability. And it goes from like essentially newborn to 5 years old. So we started the program. My oldest sister was in it. I was in it. My younger sister was in it. This is a picture of me and my sisters, and then my nephew and my niece. So we were all in the program, and my mom saw what the program did for her and wanted somehow to get involved in it and give back, and saw that a lot of the families looked like us, right? They were Hispanic families. They were young moms. And so my mom was hired in as a family and community specialist. And as she was hired in, they went through a re-grant after she'd been there for years and years and years. And they decided in their grant that every person there had to hold a bachelor's degree or higher. And if not, they could no longer have their position. Well, my mom did not have a bachelor's degree. And so they let her go. And immediately after letting her go, a superintendent of the school who was on the board of the Head Start program said, you need people that are helping the families that are going into these communities, into these neighborhoods, into these homes to look like those people, right? Betty was good at what she did, and so they immediately rehired her back about a year later. And my mom excelled. She took classes to get to, where they felt she needed to be and excelled. And she did this for almost 20 years. Um, and she was one of these people who took these families, gave them a voice, gave them the confidence, um, advocated them well beyond just schooling and pre-K and the Head Start program. I remember going into like the grocery store and someone would stop her and they're like, Miss Betty, I just got my PhD. And my mom's like, please don't let me know I'm that old to know that you've been able to go up and do that. So it was fun. She was a huge part of this community. She took these things that have happened to her, this trauma that she had, this pain that she had, and sat there and said, I want to work with people who went through that and let them know that they're great and they're amazing and they're valued and they're needed. This was a quote I remember they had. My mom in 2017, I believe, maybe, she passed away unexpectedly. We have no idea how. She had a cold, went into the hospital and passed away. But at her funeral, at the funeral home, the funeral director came up to us and he said, we're borrowing vases from other funeral homes. We're like, okay, like we don't know why he's telling us this. And he later comes on and says, we've never had someone deliver this many flowers. We're wondering if this has anything to say how many people are going to be showing up to this. So we asked the church next door if we could use their parking lot. And we asked the business across the way who's closed on Saturday and Sundays if we can use that. The people, my mom, the family she had worked with, the kids that she had worked with for 20 years, they all showed up. There were thousands of people at my mom's funeral. It wrapped around the funeral home. And I remember realizing, looking at a sea of Latino and Hispanic people being like, this matters. When we surround our community and we uplift each other, this matters. And so the funeral director talked about the coffee being burnt. We were there until midnight for her viewing to make sure everyone could see. But the party kept going. And it was a reassuring moment that to know that my mom's legacy was something great, but also to know that like I need to be a fraction of who she was. And as I was looking at the community of people that were staying out there, I thought I want to do what she did. So how do I fit into all of this? This is the most embarrassing photo I've ever seen of myself. I have all of 2 teeth sticking out, and I so badly wanted to have Nick Carter hair from the Backstreet Boys that the 2 hairs that I had, it just pulled as hard as I could down the middle. But I never, growing up, saw myself represented in the classroom. So I know I had said that like I didn't even know Hispanic Heritage Month was a thing, but it was a thing back from like the 80s. I had no idea. Academically, I never learned about any Hispanic and Latino people. Culturally within the classroom, there was never a day where we, talked about different foods or different holidays or clothing or anything like that, or professionally. I think I talk about it next, but I didn't have my first Hispanic or Latino teacher until I was in 11th grade. I was a junior in high school. None of them. Now remember, the makeup of my school at that time was nearing about half Hispanic and Latino. By the time I graduated, like I said, it was like 56%. So majority, or at least half of every class was Hispanic or Latino, and we still never learned about ourselves. So I think it would have been my senior year of high school and then going on to college was the first time I had learned about the realities and real histories of Christopher Columbus, and all of these different ideas and stories I was told. I found out they were false, right? I learned about the paper genocide, and that is my grandparents, when their family would come over, their siblings, they would tell us that we're Taino, and Taino is the indigenous people of Puerto Rico. And they would tell us we're Taino, they would tell us we're Taino. And I was like, but there, are we though? Is that just an idea? And for a while, we were told that there's no Taino people left. They all died out. And what had actually happened is Taino people were scared and fearful of putting themselves on the census for the United States, on any paperwork. So they called it the paper genocide because on paper, there were no more Taino people. In reality, There was. And we had to just go off of stories from our ancestors and our grandparents that we were Taino and believe that. And then I think it was in I'm going to lie about the time because I don't remember. I think 2011 to 2015-ish, they found in Puerto Rico a skull, and they tested the bones of the skull and found out that it's actually, it was a Taino. It was a Taino person from hundreds of years ago. And it retroactively, then people could get tested to see if they tested for the Taino gene. And suddenly, oh my God, sure enough, we were Taino. And it's an idea and an example of how so many people's cultures and communities can just be kind of wiped away or unheard of. And sometimes all we have left is the words of our ancestors and that belief, and that is enough. It is hard. And I feel like in the US, if it's not on paper and pen, it didn't happen. And that is a privilege to have. A lot of communities don't have that because they were burned, their stories were destroyed. And so it's an affirmation of also me rethinking what history is. So I went away to college and came back and started working for the Head Start program by mistake because I was going through a bad breakup. My mom said I had to stop crying on her couch. And so she told me, why don't you go sub for the Head Start program? So I became a substitute teacher. Within like a week, I was like, I love this. They offered me a full-time position and they said they would, pay for my teaching degree and certificates. So I started doing that. And it didn't take long for me to realize that the classroom, that my classroom looked like me. Look, they were, a bunch of Hispanic Latino children. And I remember going through about half the school year and realizing I have not done a single activity on culture. I looked at my classroom library and I was like, these are all either like character books, like cartoon character books, or about white children. And that wasn't the makeup of my class. And I thought, I cannot do what was done to me. I cannot continue this idea of erasing people's cultures. And I want children to come into my classroom fully as themselves. I want them to feel represented. I want them to see pictures of people that look like them on the walls. I want to have them see books. I want them to have toys and dolls and that look like them. And I want them to see, also see communities and cultures that don't look like them. And that was hugely important to me. And I pulled from this idea of seeing my mom do it for years. And I started reshaping my classroom to look like that because I didn't want children to go through what I went through. As I came back, I saw this shift within my community of where I was living in Goshen. And it was the new generation of Hispanic and Latino people became empowered and felt like they had voices and a stake and a say, and they became educated and vocal. And they did everything that their parents came to the US to do. And I don't mean this in a very patriotic American dream kind of way. I mean that they came here and they wanted to give their children an opportunity. And these children took that opportunity. And they came back home, a lot of them did, and they became positions of leadership, positions in education, positions in our health system, positions in our local government and our school curriculum. And I finally started seeing a city and a town that looked like the community that was living in it, right? And now I go home and I can see there's many like local restaurants that are family owned, that are Mexican food, authentic Mexican food. I'm not talking Taco Bell or Chipotle. I'm talking actual authentic Mexican food and Puerto Rican food and Guatemalan food. And we have parades and they celebrate these huge holidays within these countries and within these cultures at the schools, and it's amazing to see. And it's amazing to see people who for so long were not given a voice and were told that they were not the majority, that they're the minority, that they're marginalized, step up to the plate and say enough's enough and kind of give that rally cry. So I went from Goshen to the Philly suburbs. I say I live at an affluent white place, and it houses QVC, the home shopping network, just to give an idea of like kind of what the town looks like. And I started working at a private school because there was no Head Start around me because it was too affluent where we had moved to for my husband's job. And I started, for the first time in my teaching career, feeling a lot of microaggressions from my admin and from some of my colleagues. And one specifically was my admin came up to me and congratulated me on it being Cinco de Mayo, and I can speak Spanish all day to the kids if I want. And I was like, okay. And then was asking if I was going to get margaritas after work, and I'm like, and then she's like, well, you're Puerto Rican. I thought, don't you celebrate Cinco de Mayo? I'm like, no, it's not a Puerto Rican holiday. And trying to explain that to her, and found out this very well-educated woman had no idea that Puerto Rico was not in Mexico and thought Puerto Rican and Mexican people were the same. And I informed her that Puerto Rico is in the Caribbean and is closer to Jamaica than it is Mexico. And I looked at this, and I remember being within my classrooms and kind of closing myself off again and being like, well, all of my students are white. I was the only person of color, and I'm pretty white, in the school. I was the only male, and I was the only queer person at the school. And I very much felt like I was very seen. And I kind of could feel this idea of me telling myself to tone things down. And I quickly snapped out of it. And I was saying to myself, well, I've always said I want the classroom to reflect the kids in it. So if all the kids are white, and then I thought, no, absolutely not. Like, the kids have to see what the world outside of their own rooms look like. And so it kind of shook them that I was bringing in different cultures when, that necessarily wasn't the makeup of the classroom, but it was important to me. Like, I want these kids to understand and look at differences in people and accept and love those differences in people and celebrate those differences in people. And I feel like I started making that space within those classrooms because I want there to be importance of identity and culture in all spaces. And towards the end of it, as I was giving pushback, this was around COVID time, and the staff didn't want to go in the one day before our Thanksgiving break. We only had to go in on Monday. We had the rest of the week off because they were worried they'd get COVID and get sick. We weren't going to have a lot of kids there anyways. Again, it was a private school. And I had one of the teachers say, do you think you could call a Zoom meeting with the admin? Because we're scared. We don't want to go in. We don't want to lose opportunities to see our families because we get sick, or vice versa, the kids get sick. And I said, why do you guys want me to do it? And it was in that moment they were, because they won't fire you. The admin is scared of you. And I couldn't figure out why. And I realized it's because my identities intersected in such a way that for the first time in my life, I was protected, right? And so we called it in, and I realized that I could advocate for them by using this kind of privileged space that I was in, that I was not used to, because hearing the words gay, Latino, and privilege does not really go together often. So I say his superpower versus identity. I realized that in that classroom and in that moment, that one moment, how important advocating and using your voice is, especially when you have any type of privilege. In that school, I had privilege. Outside of it, not really. But it encouraged me to go back to school. A huge push of that is I wanted to do what my mom wasn't able to. My mom was never able to go back to school. That was something that she was always very self-conscious about. So I don't know how at all, but I got my bachelor's degree in 2 years in person, and we didn't have online, and taught full time. And then after that, I got accepted to an advanced standing master's program for social work, and I did that for a year and graduated with my my clinical social work degree. And that's how I became a therapist. And it was important to me as I was studying in school, was to figure out how I can further help specifically people in marginalized communities, LGBTQ plus, BIPOC people, and explore this idea of generational trauma and how do we start healing and how do we start celebrating ourselves? How do we start showing up authentically as ourselves and kind of breaking down these barriers and these fallacies that we had. So how am I doing this today? I still educate. I'm not in the classroom full time, but I still will go in and give lessons on social and emotional skills as well as equity and social justice. Um, I advocating, I speak at conferences. I work with political groups and legislation on legislation and encourage specifically people of color to go vote because it's vitally important that their voices are heard. And then I do a lot of advocating through social media, touring and entertaining. I believe that when we want someone to listen and we want someone to learn and we want someone to kind of reflect on maybe some of these prejudices that they have, we have to come from a place of not canceling, but a place of bringing them into a conversation. I find that when I do that through comedy, it's able to kind of limit some of that tension and some of that uncomfortability to have some very difficult conversations. And I've had some success of doing that through social media, through comedy tours, and through entertainment. I've done it on TV and such. All of that though is more important is the healing. Like I said, I always say if all of my social media popularity went away tomorrow, I would be okay with it because it paid for my master's degree. And I'm doing what I want to do now. And that is, I'm a therapist. I am working with children, I'm working with adults, and I'm working on healing. And I'm working and trying to be that person that I needed growing up that I did not have. Um, and that's a very long spiel of just trying to give you an idea of um, what I went through in a sense, not just me and not just a self, I did a great job and anyone can do it, but this is so many other people's stories. I'm not special. I'm just someone that has a platform that can tell the story that so many other people are experiencing and have gone through. Um, so yeah, I'm gonna attempt to stop sharing, and I figured that out, and open up to if y'all have questions.
Well, first, Till, I want to take time and thank you for being with us and sharing your story. Um, I don't think I've ever heard of Goshen, Indiana, so now I have a tie directly to you. And it's what you shared about your mom was extremely beautiful. So thank you for being vulnerable with us. I want to apologize again for our Zoom bomber. That's never happened before. But as I knew you would, handling it like a pro. So again, thank you so very much. And what
Absolutely.
I want to do is I put some couple of things in the chat and I want to give people an opportunity to ask you questions, but I wanted to lead us off. So everyone, if you have a question for Tel, you can either raise your hand or put it in the chat. And when we think about your social media following and the path that you took, knowing that today's talk is about your identity being a superpower, did you social media and being an influencer is such a highly desirable but often saturated market.
Yeah.
How did you feel that your identity and the intersections of your identity played into you having millions of followers and people wanting to hear from you and learn from you?
I think there was a privilege kind of that happened off the bat. There's not a lot of uh, men in early childhood education. And so I think that right away that kind of gave me a little bit of a anomaly. People were like, oh, who um, it does get saturated. I think that a lot of teachers, a lot of influencers, teacher influencers specifically kind of stray away from getting political because if they get political, they lose brand deals. If they get political, they don't get ads. And I don't give a shit about that. Sorry. I don't care. I don't want this to be, I've never wanted to be a social media star. It happened on accident. So it's easier for me to kind of push it to the side because it's not a dream of mine, right? My agent's like, why are you going to school? Why are you in graduate school and not going this way? It's just, it wasn't a want. I continued with social media because I realized it was a platform that's needed, that people need we need to give voices to those who are marginalized. But also, like I said, it paid for my graduate degree. And I was like, it's important that if I have an outlet and a way of getting there, I'm going to do that. And then I said, if after this, if people still need me, if they still want my voice, if I can pass the mic to, more people of color, great. Like I'll continue doing until people get sick of me.
That's fantastic. It's really nice to hear. I heard you mention a little bit about cancel culture, about calling people in, and the fact that you were able to take what you were earning from social and to transform it into a degree that you'll have forever and a skill set.
Yeah.
So that's fantastic. But I don't want to hog our time, Tell. I know that obviously I'm a fan of your story and your work and your comedy. But again, anyone that has a question, please feel free to either put it in the chat, or if you want to just raise your hand, you can come off of mute, and now is the time to ask. And I know there's some folks here and a lot of positive hearts and claps and things in the chat. And thank you for telling your story, Tell. That's obviously amazing. And we have Darlisha. Darlisha, if you want to come off of mute, feel free to ask Tell a question.
Okay, Tell, I don't have a question for you because what I have is a thank you. I have followed you. I have seen your videos. I have watched them all. I think you're hilarious. But what I think that it was most important in you being here is to talk about the microaggressions, to talk about what's happening in the field of early education, and really speak out about the need for support inside of the classrooms and the availability to be seen in these spaces.
Yeah.
I was a preschool teacher for 14 years before becoming a therapist. It's really difficult for someone outside to see how hard it is to be that only face of color in a space. So I want to say that I appreciate you being here, and I appreciate you speaking out on that and learning so much more about you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, and I think I touched on it a little bit before too. I also have to acknowledge my passing privilege, right? Like, I have the privilege of walking into space if I don't feel safe, to not always own the pork inside. And it's something that when I started feeling like I was doing that within the classroom, I was like, I can't do this. This isn't okay. So thank you. That I can't. 14 years of pre-K, my God.
Darlisha, thank you so much. And we'll take comments too. If you just want to give a shout out or a comment, we absolutely love those. But again, I want to make sure that with the time that we have remaining, if you have a question, please feel free to come off mute. You can use the chat feature, you can raise your hand, but yes, please ask your questions. I know some of the folks here. Okay, well, Tell, there we go. Somebody, I can't tell who that is.
Jane.
Jane, there you go, Jane. Yeah, please.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. Really great to hear, and so unique, but also kind of universal, your story. So thank you for sharing that. And my question is, how are things in Goshen now? I'm just curious. I know, here in San Francisco, we're struggling so much with so many things, and just curious how it is there now.
I remember when I left 5 years ago, it was going well, right? It was like I felt, I mean, I did not save our community by any stretch of the imagination, but it's like I left a community in a better space than when I grew up. Obviously, giving a lot of parental rights groups, hate groups, it's had a lot of regression. And I think the thing that is so encouraging to see is that people aren't taking it lying down. That like I said, we've gone through, it seems like every 10 years something. And I think people are now have the tools and the voice and are willing to fight. And that's a beautiful thing to see, people pushing back on having picture books and adult or young adult novels and middle grade books in libraries at schools of Black and brown children and queer children. And it's encouraging to see a community fight back on it.
Great question, Jane. Thank you. So a couple of things, a shout out to that you have a great laugh and beautiful graphics in your presentation. And then Leandra said, what do you think is the dopest thing about you, and what do you want to learn next?
The dopest thing about me. I'm fortunate to have a really amazing family and support system. I don't think I could be doing this type of advocacy without that, because it's there's a lot of hate and a lot of scary stuff that happens with it. And so I'm fortunate. I think the dopest part is probably my family. I also have a really cute corgi dog that I'm obsessed with. What do I want to learn next? I just feel like I'm a lifelong learner. I know that even within this presentation, I could see 5 or 6 things. I'm like, "Ooh, why'd you say that?" Or that seemed insensitive, or what, I want to be better at listening and better at taking information in and not getting defensive when it's happening, just to kind of let my guards down and be an active listener to some education.
Thank you, Leandra, for the question. And you know, Tel, that's really interesting, especially in the political climate that we're in, where everything is partisan. Folks being open to being active listeners and not only wanting to be heard, but really wanting to listen and understand and find those through lines is such a beautiful thing. I want to give people one more opportunity to ask a question to Tel, or to give a shout out or a comment before we close out for today. If anyone has any final questions, now is the time to do it. If not, I want to just thank you so much for sharing your story, sharing your time, being an advocate in the space, and just doing everything that you're doing. So obviously continued success, and we'll be watching you on social. So definitely keep up the amazing videos. For those of you that work at Compass Family Services, stay on this Zoom link. If you work at Compass Family Services, stay on this Zoom link. If you are visiting today, the Inclusion Talk series will be uploaded to YouTube. You can follow Compass Family Services on all social media, on LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, and follow us on YouTube so you can see this Inclusion Talk series featuring Tel and all of our other talks. Next month, we have the amazing Dr. John Paul, who will be talking to us for LGBTQ History Month. I want to thank each and every one of you again for being here. Tel, thank you for your time.
Absolutely.
You are awesome. I'm going to stop the recording. And again, if you work at Compass, stay on this Zoom. Everyone else, I hope you have a fantastic day on purpose.